I'm going to do a real quick tutorial here on how to handle the data that we collect from the dynamometer lab in Excel, how to make the equations that we need to make to calculate power, and then how to create a professional looking graph. So let's tear into it. This is just some basic data, very similar to what you would be calculating in the lab. So you're going to be measuring the speed with a digital tachometer, and you're also going to be measuring force from the force transducer on the back of the dynamometer. And notice that I've already have this data in 2 columns here, and I've also put headers above those columns so I know what's going on. Both telling me what it is. I got the speed data and the units that it's in so that I don't get confused. So the units are RPM and the force is in pounds. Notice also that I have some metadata on top here so I know what's going on. So just very simple. This is tractor performance data. This is the tractor that I tested, the John Deere 7220, and the date that I tested it, and we should put lab members and other things on there, so it'd be some extra data that you should put in there. So keep track of all that so that you know what's going on in that data sheet, and that's what you have. So let's look at our data, and we have speed and force, and to calculate power, remember we need torque and speed. So we have force, so how do we get torque? So let's create a new column here. So I'm just going to go into the top of the next column, and I'm going to put the header in there first so I know what I'm calculating. So I'm going to type torque right there, and the units that I'm going to put it in is going to be foot-pounds. So I've got pounds already, so let's put this in foot-pounds. So put the units there, and that's what I'm going to calculate. So let's say that we've got our force data here, and let's say that the moment arm, or the length of the arm in that dynamometer, I measured it was 1.2 feet. So it may be something different. You guys may see different data in there, but use whatever you have. So to calculate torque, I need to take this force and multiply it by that moment arm. And so the torque here is 100. So the way you build an equation is you start with the equals button. So click in the cell where you want the equation, hit equals, and that starts an equation. And then you can either move the cursor to the left or the right to pick up the number that you want. So in this case, I want force, or I can go over here and click with my pointer. So I can click on the force. So I need the force, and then I need to multiply that by 1.2. So I hit the asterisk, and that's the multiply sign, and then say 1.2 because that's my particular moment arm. And hit enter, and that'll calculate it. And of course, a 100-pound force comes out to be 120. And when we multiply it by 1.2. Now, I need to do that for the rest of these. So I could come down here and say equals and go over here to the left one cell to get the next data point and multiply it by 1.2 and do that for all the extra cells, but that's a lot of work, and Excel does this a lot easier for us. So let me undo that and get rid of it and show you how to copy that down. And there's a number of different ways we can do it, so I'll show you this way, that we can click on the cell that I just created. You can see up here is the value, the cell times 1.2. I'm going to right click on that cell. There's a contextual menu that'll come up, and I'm going to say copy. So I'm going to copy that cell, and then I'm going to come below it and highlight all of the cells all the way down to the end of the column. I'll right click in there somewhere, then the contextual menu, I'm going to hit paste. And there's a bunch of different paste options here, but the first one is just paste that cell in there. So I click paste, and what it does then is it copies that value, but it keeps the cell reference relative to wherever I was. So in the first cell, I went over to B8 and picked up that value. In the second cell, it goes to B9. This cell down here picks up B17, so B17 is the one on the left. So it copies it all down and calculates it. So that's a real quick way to get the torque. So now I have the torque for all those different points. So there's speed, force, torque. Now to get power, I need to multiply torque times the speed. So let's go over here and create another column. So power, type that in, hit return, and the units here is going to be in horsepower. So I'm going to calculate this in horsepower. So let's go and build my equation here. So what do I have to do? I have to do torque. So I'm going to hit the equal sign again to start an equation. Move over to the left and do torque. Do the multiply, asterisk for times, move over to the left and pick up speed, and then just hit enter. C8 times A8, and there's my power. Well, that isn't my power. That's way too big. But what did I forget? Remember, I forgot the units conversion. So in all those calculations that we did, we have to have all those units conversion numbers in there as well. Now, I can type all those in, work out an equation, and that's typically what we do is work out that equation, and so that I know exactly what that conversion is. But if you remember, we had that shortcut that we looked up on Google a long time ago, and it's 5252, right? So I can go up here to the cell. I click on the cell that I know was an error, and go up to the top, and here's my formula bar, C8 times A8, and I'm going to click on that so I can edit that and hit the slash for divided by 5252, and 2, there it goes, 5252, hit enter, and now it tells me how much horsepower that I'm creating there. And again, I can copy this all the way down the same way I did before, or there's another shortcut. So if I click on that cell, down in the lower right-hand corner of that cell indicator, you see a little green square. If I hover over that green square, my cursor changes to a plus sign. I grab that square and hold it with the mouse, drag it all the way down, and it copies all those numbers. So there's all the numbers, all the horsepowers all the way down. So that's how you can calculate that. Again, we don't need to work out all of these numbers in the units conversion, so we can use the overall number. And if we don't know what that number is, then you work out the first one on paper, multiply all those units conversion numbers together, and that's the number that you plug into here. So you don't need to do everything, but that's how you get that. So you get the right power there, and it's a good idea always to verify these numbers and make sure that they're reasonable. And I know for this tractor, something a little less than 90 horsepower is pretty reasonable for that tractor, so that should be pretty good numbers. All right. Now, we want to create a graph. So how do we do that? So up here at the Insert menu up on the top is where we can create a graph or a chart. Actually, Excel calls them charts. So we come over here and look at a whole bunch of different options for charts. Now, I want to say something very quickly, because here's where a lot of people get messed up, because you can create a chart. If I just look at this and say, oh, I want something that looks like that picture there. If I pull that down, yeah, I want something that has a line or data points or something like that, connecting all my data and everything. That's what I want to do. So that one is going to get you in trouble. So there's two different kinds. So let me go back here. So there's this one that the contextual menu comes up and tells me that that is a line or area chart. And there's this one down here that is an XY. So here's where you get in trouble. If I do a line chart, the x-axis is always equally spaced. Every number is equally spaced on the chart. So, for instance, if I had data that was like 10, 20, and then 50, I should have 10 and 20 pretty close together and 50 way over here. But what that line chart will do is make 10 and 20 and 50 all equally spaced along the bottom of that graph, and you get really, really goofy data. So that is a weird thing used primarily for financial kind of stuff. So don't get hung up on that. What you need down here is an XY scatter plot. So this is what you want, is an XY scatter plot. All right. Now, typically what we want to do before we hook this up is highlight the data that we want to graph. So I'm going to go ahead and I want, first of all, just make my torque curve. So I'm going to do, I don't have torque and speed right beside each other in columns. There's one in between. So Excel's kind of smart. So if I highlight a bunch of data, it'll actually kind of create a graph for me. So let's try this. I'm going to highlight these first three columns. I'm going to pick up my speed column, and I'm going to pick up force and torque. I don't necessarily want to plot force right now, but I'll show you how you can get rid of that. But this is kind of a quick way to do that. And actually, I want to put my cursor over here somewhere so that I know where this is going to be. But or highlight these three columns. Come over here to create a scatter plot. Here we go. And, it actually, if I move it around, it kind of shows me what that scatter plot is going to look like. And typically when we plot data like this, you don't want to put lines in between it. And we can talk more about that. But typically you just want to plot the dots, and that gives us an idea of what the shape of that curve is going to be. So there's a pretty good looking chart. That's kind of what on our order of what we wanted to do. So let's go ahead and take that scatter chart, and let's work with it. So here's my scatter chart. I'm going to make it a little bit easier so we can see it pretty good on the video. All right. So it's kind of crude right now. And first of all, I've got extra data. So now if I go to the left and look at the data over here, you can see that the speed is in purple and the force and the torque are in blue. So what that did is they assumed, Excel assumed that the first column was going to be my x-axis and the other two columns are going to be two different data sets on the y-axis. So that's what I want. I want the speed on the x-axis, but what I need to do is get rid of the force. So which one is the force? So if I just click on one of these blue dots in that data series, and it actually shows me over here, this is the force column that's lit up. That's the one that I don't want in the data. So I'm just going to hit the delete button and get rid of it. So now I've got my torque curve up on there. So there's torque, and it's kind of what we expect. You know, straight line. We see Governor Max here. We see a curve going up there. So this one has a really long torque curve. So it's a big diesel tractor. So it'll give me a curve that looks like that. All right. So that's pretty cool. Now let's clean up the graph and show you a lot of different things that we can do with this graph. All right, first off, I got a chart title up here, so let's put a meaningful title on here. So I can just call this my torque curve. So you really should put, and I'm not going to spend the time, but you really should put the tractor on there and stuff like that, so that when I look at this, when somebody looks at this graph, they know where it came from. So torque curve, John Deere 7220, something like that, you know. So that's what you should have. So that's my torque curve. Now, what I'd really like to have is, oh man, so click out here. Highlight this whole graph. I'd really like to have labels on the X and the Y axis. So I want to know that this is torque numbers and this is the speed numbers over here. So the way we can do that, we can add a lot of elements or take elements away from this graph. And over here, this plus sign on the right-hand side, when you highlight the graph, allows me to add or remove a lot of these chart elements. So let's take a look at that. Let's do add. So we've got the axes on there. I want the axis titles on there. So let's go ahead and put those axis titles. When I hover it, it actually shows what they would look like. So we're going to put titles on the X and the Y axis. I'm going to leave that chart title there, so that looks pretty good. Now the legend, I only have one data set, so I really don't need a legend to tell me which is which. So I'm going to take the legend off, so I'm going to uncheck that and get rid of that Series 2 thing that was down in the bottom there. So now it's a much, much cleaner graph, so that looks a little bit better, all right? So, and I'm not going to go all the way through this. I'll let you guys do this, but I'm just going to show you how to do this. But I can go over here now and type in the data on this. So triple click, usually we'll get... Try the bottom. There you go. Triple click will click that title, so I can put torque over here. Torque. And usually in parentheses we'll put the units. So this is a foot pound. All right. So torque in foot pounds. And I can change the size of this thing, so I can go up to the top here and make that or click out of the edit mode, but I can make that bigger so that it's viewable and stuff like that. So I can change these and make it look a lot better. All right. So those are the kind of things we can do, but that's how you put your axis titles on there. In the bottom, I would put speed and RPM. All right. So that's how you make it look a little bit better. Now look at this data here. You see that my graph starts from 0 and goes up to 1200, but my data only goes down to 400. I'd like to spread that data out a little bit more to see it, because I don't, there's nothing going on in this part of the graph down here. So go down here over the axis where in the chart there, or I click on or on one of these numbers, and sometimes you have to move around to click it, but I want to keep clicking and right clicking until I get the contextual menu for the axis down here. So the axis is highlighted. You can see the contextual menu comes up, and I can say format the axis. So I'm going to click on format axis, and what that should do is bring, depending on how your software is configured, it should bring up a menu on the right-hand side where I can format that axis. And here's where I can say, the minimum, the axis, the bounds of the axis go from 0 to 1200. Well, my data starts up above 400. So let's start this at 400. So I'm going to click in there and say 400 and hit enter. And what that should do is clean up all that dead space on the graph. And now my graph shows going from 400 up to 1100. So I can clean that up and make that look good the way I want to. So again, putting all the curves, put all the axes and everything on there. So that's great. All right. Now, let's say that I had the torque on there, but I also want to put the power on the same curve and see what that power curve looks like. So how do we do that? Well, I can right-click in this chart area here somewhere, and you got to hold your mouse still when you do it. So bring up the contextual menu, and down here is an option that says select data. So I'm going to select data so that I can put another data series in there. So now here's my data series. I only have one series in here on the left. Now this one, I'm going to edit that because that one says series 2, but I want to edit that thing and give it a name. So this is my torque curve. So I know that that was torque. So that's the torque curve. This is the X values, and this is the Y values for that particular data set. So I say, okay. Now I want to add another one. So let's go ahead and add another data series. So the series name, this is going to be power. So I'm going to do the power curve. Go to the X values here. So click in the X values. So my X axis is this column on the left. So I highlight that column. Oops, so you got to get the whole thing. So let me try that again and make sure I get the whole thing. The right number of data points. There it is. And then the Y values, and the Excel puts this little equals 1 thing in there, so you always have to delete that off or it'll screw you up. But now the Y values are going to be the power. So I'll come over here and highlight power, and I should say OK. And look, it actually showed it down here that that's what that data is going to look like. So before I hit OK, I can say, yeah, that looks right. That should be reasonable. That's what my power curve kind of should look like. So I say OK. And there's my power curve in there. So I've got it in, got the data in there, torque and power, and say, okay, now let's clean up this graph a little bit because my torque numbers are really big, but my power numbers are small, so it's kind of hard to see what's going on because they're all squashed down the bottom. So what I typically like to do is put a secondary axis over here so that the power uses the full axis and I can see what it's doing, what it means. All right, so click on the data series. Right click on that, or actually when I click on it and highlight it, if this menu is still up over here, format data series, I can just go straight to it, or if I have lost that, I can right click on there and say format data series, and that'll bring this up over here. And notice that there's 3 options. One is the fill in the line, one is the shadow, and you can put some effects and everything on it. But the right one says the series options. And here it says plot the series on the primary axis or the secondary axis. The primary axis is your left axis, but I want to put a secondary axis on the right-hand side that's a different scale so that my data look better. So I'm going to plot that one on a secondary axis. As soon as I do that, it throws numbers on the right-hand side of the curve. Now I can see this really nice power curve, and I can see what it looks like. I can look at where the peak power is and stuff like that. So it looks a whole lot better to me. So that's what I'm going to keep there. So that makes the curve look pretty good. All right. Now I don't have over here the title that I need on the right-hand side. So again, come over here to plus. Go to axis titles, and notice on the right-hand side there's an arrow. So if I click on that arrow, it has titles on the primary horizontal, the primary vertical. I want to put it on the secondary vertical. So I want to put an axis title on the secondary vertical. So I put a check mark in there, and now that gives me an axis title on the right-hand side of the curve. So that's great. So now I can go in there and edit that, put the title on there, whatever I need it to be, and make that look good. All right. Now, one other thing that you want to do with these graphs, a lot of people will print these out on a black and white printer. And while this looks really cool, I have these blue dots and I have the orange dots. That looks pretty cool. When they get plotted on a black and white printer, you can't tell the difference between them. And in fact, I look at those and I don't even have a legend down here anymore. So I really need to go back, highlight this, and put my legend in there so that I know where it is. So let's go down here to legend. Now, the default, it wants to put it over on the right-hand side. I think that looks kind of goofy, but you can do whatever looks good. So I open up the axis, and I'm going to put that legend at the bottom. So I'm going to stick the legend at the bottom. And there's my legend with my torque and power, and I can see the yellow ones are the torque, the blue ones are the power. But now when I print this in black and white, they're going to look the same. So what I like to do is change at least the symbols, and make sure that the symbols are something different, that when I print them in black and white, that you're going to be able to differentiate them, know what the difference is. So let's go in here to fill in line, actually the fill in line, and down below that in my format data series is my marker. So click on marker, and in the marker in marker options underneath here, I don't want to do automatic. I want to do something that's built in, and the type, I'm going to change the shape. So, and here's all kind of different shapes that I can use. So I can put a diamond on that instead of a circle. So now I can see that these are diamonds over in here, and they're pretty small. They're still hard to see, so I can change the size, make them a little bit bigger, and so that they look good. So there's our big diamonds. That's my torque curve, and my small dots are the power curve. So when I like that, I click back over here, and now I can differentiate that. Even if they come out the same color, I can see that the diamonds are torque and the circles are power. So there we go. So now I got this really nice curve, really nice chart, and again, you'll clean up the axis titles and all that kind of stuff and make them look good. So now we got to print the thing. So we can say if I wanted to print just the chart, I highlight the chart like that and come over here and say File and Print, and it'll print. You'll be able to see a preview of how to print that thing. So it should show up, accessing a printer. It's looking for my printer. There's my chart. So the chart comes up, and that's what it would look like just printing the chart. So, and I could hit print, all your options over here. You guys know how to do that. So if I go back, let's say that I want to do the whole spreadsheet and print it out. So I just click out of the chart in a cell somewhere. Again, do File and Print, and it'll say, what does this look like? And it's going to come up and say, as soon as it gets formatted, and there we go. And then I got my date over here, and I got half my chart, because the second chart's going to be on page 2 or something like that and look kind of goofy. So I don't want to print it out like that, because that's going to be really weird. So page 2 is going to be like the second half of that. Now let's go back and clean that up. So how do I clean that up? So go back, and here I can go under page layout. There's a couple things I can do. So I can go under page layout, and underneath here, there's this scale to fit. And right now it's automatic, so it's going to print whatever font size I wanted and so forth. Instead of making that automatic, I want to say 1 page wide. So I'm going to click on 1 page. And what that's going to do is shove that thing into one page. All right. So let's go. That's done there. So let's say File, Print. See what this is going to look like. Accessing my printer, rendering the image, and hopefully I got my data and my chart all together. Yeah, there they are. So there's my data and my chart all together. That looks pretty good, except that, it's really small. So, and you could spend a lot of time really playing around making this look good, but instead of printing that in portrait mode, I might come over here to orientation and say landscape mode. And then I'll print it sideways on the paper. I'll have my data and my chart there. They'll be nice and big. Or you could put the chart underneath the data or something like that if you wanted to print them both together. So there's a lot of different ways we can do that. But that's a quickie how to get this stuff together, how to manipulate your data, do the equations and stuff like that you need to do, and make the charts and everything. So I expect great looking charts, and you guys being able to put this data together, make it look good, be able to present it in a professional manner.